Today, I used to wear these a lot, but I don't anymore. I much prefer my sweatpants and my sweatpants. But today feels good. Kind of like ice cream on a hot dog. Think about that for a minute. Do any of you remember the movie Officer and a Gentleman with Richard Gere? And it's on VHS. We have it. It's old, but it's about a troubled young man, kind of cocky, a chip on his shoulder, who enters a naval academy in Seattle and to become a Navy pilot. And then there's this drill sergeant, this tough drill sergeant, who's responsible not only for his training, but for weeding out the stragglers and the unfit. And along the way, he pushes them really hard, and some of them do. They do what's called a DOR, drop on request. Well, anyway, he has his eyes set on Zach Mayo, this young man who's thinks only of himself, doesn't care about anybody else, and kind of schemes and does some sneaky things. And the drill sergeant really pushes him for the DOR. And this one weekend when he's in trouble, just where everybody else is off on leave, he puts him through all these tests, grueling things, and he finally gets to the point where he can't go on, and the drill sergeant says, "Give me your DOR. You don't belong here. You know it." And Richard Gere in tears, or Zach Mayo on the ground, says, "No, I'm not going to. I have nowhere else to go. I have nothing else." And then everything changes. The drill sergeant sees through the tough exterior into the rather frightened, desperate boy beneath, and says, "Come on, get up, and let's go back to the barracks." And he goes on to become a much better student, caring of his other students and helping them, but then also he becomes a graduate to go on to fly. It's a story about surrender, but not the surrender of a defeated enemy to the victor. It's the surrender of a humble soul, if you will, and a giving over of one's life to something larger, something bigger, something more than himself that has meaning. And we see this surrender in all the text today. We didn't get much of the Psalm 42. It was in the call to worship. That was interesting, just by way of aside, to see Jackie reading the text today. Jackie's an Anglican, and I'm the Anglican. I'm preaching today. But actually, yesterday I was at an Anglican workshop at St. Cuthbert's in Surrey Delta, and they were asking us which parishes we were from. And I got to me, and I said, "I'm from St. Aidan's Presbyterian Church." So while I was raising the Presbyterian flag there, we're raising, I guess, the Anglican one today, which is fascinating. Anyway, in the King's passage that Jackie read, Elijah is given a death sentence by Queen Jezebel, and he's afraid. And I don't know why, because he's this tough, forbearing man with all kinds of fortitude. He's just killed a whole bunch of Baal priests. But anyway, he's afraid out of his wits, and he starts running as far as he can go. He gets to the desert, and he has this plea. It's a surrender. He says, "Dear God, take my life, for I am not what my ancestors were." And an angel comes and feeds him in the desert and urges him on to Mount Horeb, God's holy mountain. He goes there, and he's in a cave there, and God appears. But it's interesting, and just lovely the way there's a sound of an earthquake. God's not in the earthquake. There's a sound of wind blowing vehemently, but God's not in the wind. And there's a fire, but God isn't in the fire. And yet God comes in a thin whisper. That idea of thin harkens back to Scottish notions of thin places and standing stones and things like that. But in a thin whisper, God comes to him and restores him to his ministry and mission in the world. That surrender when, like Zach Mayo, when he's at the end of it, I have nowhere else to go. I have nothing else. Take my life because I can't go on. And then he is restored. In the song that you didn't hear much of, but it's too about surrender. It's like an inner dialogue that we're privy to, where the psalmist is downcast, desolate. We don't know what for. But then, and after this surrender, he remembers God in the holy places that he's been to and in his own life, and he too is renewed and brought back to life. And then, of course, there's the demoniac, Gerasene demoniac, who has all the demons, the legion of demons, taken out of him and put into a herd of pigs. Now, that often just gets slipped right by, the herd of pigs. What about those poor pigs? Who seems to care about them? There's the SPCA, the animal, it's a lot of pork just gone. But anyway, the demoniac, of course, surrenders his life to Jesus Christ and stays there to serve him. That always doesn't happen with the people that Jesus heals, but this one pointedly says, I want to serve you, and his life is brought around. Well, this idea of surrender, I think, is at the core of the Christian Gospels and the redemption that it offers us. There's a quote from a writer, I don't hear much of him anymore, but Scott Peck wrote Road Less Traveled and People Who Arrive and things like this. And he was quite good, and he said something like, we don't become fully human until we discover something worth dying for. And so you hear echoes of Christ's example. And so there's this idea that we don't realize our human potential, what we can be as human beings, until we give our lives over to God. It's not a crutch, but it's actually a lever that gives us resources that we wouldn't otherwise have. And of course, the scriptures are replete. If you lose your life for my sake, you will find that there is no greater gift that a man can give than to lay down his life for another. There's also this line in the Anglican morning prayer service book that goes something like, in whose service is perfect freedom. In whose service is perfect freedom. Isn't that a wonderful paradox? That in surrender, in giving your life over to that service, you actually become liberated. You become separated from all that is unnecessary and superficial. So there's this wonderful theme that through surrender, by being brought low, we are raised up. But it raises challenges for us, I think, as Christians. Perhaps, maybe most for those of us in mainline churches who find the confrontation and the challenge that often precipitates the surrender that other more conservative evangelical churches seem to be able to do, but often feels intrusive and manipulated to us. So I don't know how to work that through. I'll say something a little later about that. But then, just as Christians in a world where really denies that faith is important, that our human potential doesn't depend on God. I read this quote this week from a commentary where they were saying that the church really is in permanent exile. And as Christians, we live as resident aliens in a culture that does not believe that human beings need God, but rather says we are alone. It's all up to us. So there is this challenge for us as Christians with this gospel of surrender and service. But I wanted to share with you something more positive, a miracle actually, and it's my miracle. And I want to share with you, you know my story, of course, I won't go into all that sordid health stuff, but about a year, last fall, I reached reached a point with 2 or 3 years of chronic pain in my undercarriage, my rear end. I've been called a pain in the ass from time to time. I had no idea what grief I was causing. But it was just unrelenting and unforgiving, and I reached a point where I just had enough. I wanted it over one way or another. And I had a really profound prayer with God, a desperate prayer, much more desperate than I had prayed in a long time, basically echoing Zach Mayo saying, I have nowhere else to go. I am at the end of it. You alone I have to turn to. Please help me. Either help me end this or help me do something with the pain. I was asking healing necessarily, but just something to do with the pain. Well, anyway, shortly after, the rec therapist at G.S. Strong suggested I enroll in a whole bunch of different adaptive, for people with disabilities, adaptive exercise regimens, things like Tai Chi, yoga, and aquafit, in the pools, those groups that do that, and swimming, riding a recumbent bike where you sit back off of your bottom. And then also she got me enrolled in this place down at VGH where they have, it's called Park, and they have all these cutting-edge exercise machines for people with disabilities, wheelchairs, paraplegics, and so on, and people like me. And they measure your development and so on, and there's all kinds of research stuff going on about it. So that, well, anyway, to make a long story short, in the midst of all of that, something happened. The pain started to diminish and dissipate until now, in the last couple of months. I'm not sitting on a cushion. It's right there. It's right there. And you see my motorcycle helmet there. I was hoping Charles was going to be here today, because back a couple of years ago, when I was at home, because I couldn't come to church because it involved sitting so long on my butt, I heard later that Charles, who doesn't pray very often, prayed that Warren might someday roll up again on his motorcycle to church. Well, Lori and I are going to get it insured tomorrow and get it fixed and ready to go on Tuesday. Along to Charles, he may not believe in God, but God believes in him and works through him. There's this incredible experience of miracle. I've never had anything like this happen to me. I've had experiences of grace, of blessing, of transformation, and nothing so visceral, so corporal as this. Well, anyway, it's been interesting since then, because I've been trying to tell anybody who would listen, but a lot of people in these classes that I go to, and I tell them about the Tai Chi and how it stretches the spine and it moves its tendons, it softens the hamstrings and the tissues and so on. But I've missed out the role that God played. I realized I was kind of moving away from that and talking about things that everybody could relate to, and then I caught myself. I said, that's not on. I mean, you pray desperately for help, and help came. To discount now would be incredibly cynical. You remember the stories about foxholes and how there's no atheists in foxholes. But when they get out, they tend to just forget the prayer. Well, I said to myself, I don't want to be a foxhole Christian. I prayed, God showed up. And I don't know how it all happened. Maybe God got the rec therapist involved. I don't know. But I got to honor that. And so I make a point now of saying, maybe a bore to some, but in all of that, yeah, and by the way, I'm a Christian and man of faith, and I had some pretty profound prayers leading up to this, so I think that's part of it too. And so another flag that I have to raise. But I think it's also something that we can take note of in our own lives. There's always things that are happening, if we look, that have God's hand print on it, some difference that our faith makes. It might be small, it might be big, but I think those are things that we can remember to witness to when we're we're talking about it, where it comes up. Maybe this is one of the ways where we can encourage people to make that surrender, that gift of themselves to God, and service in Christ that isn't so intrusive for us. Maybe is that other. Well, I wanted to close by telling you about Tai Chi, which has become so wonderful. Lori's joined me as well to take it together. And there are 108 moves, and they're all very intertwined. It's sort of seamless, and they're very graceful. I used to see them in the park doing that. I never thinking that I could possibly do that, but it is, and it's having a real interesting effect. I can do things now that I couldn't before. Like just things like raising my, stepping on a leg to reach up and make a kick. I'm still a pig on roller skates. You're really for me, there's things that I can do and movements that are so graceful. And I don't know. I'm probably not giving the best example. But what's interesting is that as I'm learning these moves, and there's no way I can remember them. Like I can remember a script, a text, I memorized my sermon today, I can get it in my head, and that's fine. But I cannot remember these moves, except by going through them set after set after set. Slowly, I begin to kind of piece together that it's almost my body that's doing the thing, and my body is remembering, like with those balance moves, it's remembering things that it hasn't done for years. And that's a wonderful experience to not only learn, but to have your body remember stuff that was lost. And I was remembering that show, Bagger Vance. You know the story about how God comes to earth in the form of a black caddy for Matt Damon. Oh, you haven't seen the struggling golfer. Will Smith is you should really see it, it's great. Anyway, he's talking to the other caddy, and he says, in everyone there's an authentic swing. It's something that you're born with. And it's something you and only you have that makes you unique. But sometimes the world buries this authentic swing underneath our wouldas, couldas, and shouldas, and we lose it. But it's not something that we can learn or that can be taught. It's something that has to be remembered. And some people forget that they swim this way. But that idea, it's not something that can be learned or taught. It's something that has to be remembered. I really like this idea. It kind of relates to my experience of surrender and the process since with Tai Chi and so on. But that I'm learning, I'm growing, but I'm also remembering certain things. It's like coming home to a place I've never been before. There's a certain familiarity with it. And in the song that you only heard part of, when the psalmist is downcast and so low, what he does is remember what God has done for him in the past, where God has taken him to those holy places, and it's in that remembering that he is restored. The word remember itself kind of leads to this. If you take it apart, remember, it almost gives you the idea of a body that's been put apart, like disparate pieces of something that has been brought back together, remembered, and made whole. And it seems to me that this is what the life of the person of faith, the person who has surrendered, they begin a new life, remembering, being made whole. Well, may you discover this surrender in your lives and the transformation that God extends to all of us this day and always. In Jesus' name.